Hi, welcome everyone. Thanks for being here. My name is Julie and I have multiple chronic illnesses. This YouTube channel is all about living with chronic illnesses. I started it in 2020 after publishing the book, The Things We Don't Say, an anthology of chronic illness truths, which is a nonfiction anthology. An anthology is a collection of stories, in this case, all true, and in this case, about life with chronic illness. So there are 50 stories by 42 contributing authors from all over the world, ranging different ages, ethnicities, sexual orientations, gender identities, races, physical chronic illnesses, and mental chronic illnesses, with the hope that everyone will be able to find at least a few pieces that they identify with and at least a few authors that they identify with. So you can find out more at chronicillnesstruths.com. I will post that link in the description below, as well as a link to where you can find the book. So today I'm speaking with one of the contributing authors from the book. This is a series of interviews. So this is something I'd like to do so that you can learn a little bit more about the person who wrote the piece, or in this case, pieces, and learn a little bit more about what it's like to live with chronic illnesses. Today's guest is Bret Stephenson from Reno, Nevada in the United States. Bret wrote two pieces in the book. One is Grieving the Loss of Body, which is in part 4. Part 4 is Acceptance, for better or worse. The other piece is Chronic Pain versus Masculinity, which is in section 7. Part 7 is Others' Perceptions. So each piece in the book has a photo of the author, who, if you're watching this video, you can see, as well as a short bio. So I'm going to read Bret's bio before we get started. Bret wrote, before back and neck problems forced Bret onto disability benefits, he specialized in high-risk teenagers for almost 30 years, particularly gang youth. 3 back and neck fusions unfortunately pulled him out of that work, but he keeps a few projects going through the pain. Bret is the author of From Boys to Men, Spiritual Rites of Passage in an Indulgent Age, and Undercurrents of Adolescence, Tracking the Evolution of Modern Adolescence and Delinquency Through Classic Cinema. After 26 years in Lake Tahoe, Nevada, Bret is back in his hometown of Reno, Nevada to get out of the snow. And as someone in Boston, Massachusetts, I can understand that. Thank you so much for being here, Bret.
Glad to, happy to.
So to get us started, could you share a little bit about your chronic illnesses and or your symptoms?
Oh my, mine is almost all back and neck deterioration driven. So besides just the fact that I've had 4 fusions, I had to have another one since you started this process. So what started with lower back pain has evolved into, like you said, 4 fusions, a neurostimulator implant. So what that leaves me with is I can't sit, I can't lay down, I can't lay on my side. I own 2 recliners, one for sitting in the day and one for sleeping in the night. My symptoms are, besides a huge amount of arthritis, I have muscle atrophy, I have a severe fibromyalgia. I have metatarsalgia, which is where it's like where you feel like you're standing and your foot's like on the side of a 2x4 or something. Makes me I'm getting more and more unsteady. Actually going to have to get into an electric wheelchair here in a couple weeks. So my walking days are pretty much over. I also have the nerve damage from my last neck fusion created carpal tunnel syndrome in both arms and radial tunnel syndrome in both arms, which pretty much killed my typing and my writing because I can't make my hands do what they want. I'm getting cross connections, like they can poke my left middle finger and my right something finger will twitch. And so I'm getting what they call that a crossover. I can go on. It's a lot. It's a lot. It's largely huge amounts of severe pain. And then there's all the fibro and the fog and the lack of sleep and, just I quit basically going out of the house because I couldn't commit to anything. I can't sit anywhere. I'm the only person who the pandemic really hasn't changed my behavior, because all I do is just sit around. So, and try and manage my pain and try not to fall down.
Yeah, it sounds like you're doing the best that you can in a very difficult situation.
Yeah. Between the actual physical damage that came from all the surgeries and the rehabs and all that kind of stuff, and then the subsequent damage, like the nerve damage and the nerve regeneration and all that type of stuff, it's just brutal. So 3 years ago, I wasn't so happy.
I can completely understand that. And when you say 3 years ago, I'm guessing you're referencing around the time that you wrote the pieces of yours that are in the book.
Let's see.
Or are you just talking about around the time you had the surgeries?
That's when I had the fourth one that's not in the book at all. Okay. And that was actually the worst, because it revealed, I mean, it fixed what it needed to fix, but it revealed a huge amount of nerve damage. And so I had to sit there for like 1.5 years waiting for nerves to regrow and regenerate or die. And that's something I wouldn't wish on anybody. My vertebrae had, let's see, how do I do this? Had tapered kind of like down like that. And so they slid right into the spinal cord and just pinched it for years. And I didn't realize it was doing that much damage. I was just dealing with the pain. So that was interesting.
Okay, interesting is a word for it.
Well, it's interesting that they go through your throat and they do this stuff up in here into your neck, and then it just, for the next 1.5 years, your legs don't work and your feet, you've got every kind of shaking, quivering, cramping thing that can happen. Your hands are wiggling, you can't hold a spoon. It was something.
That sounds really difficult. And then it sounds like you've transitioned a bit from that point, because you said that lasted 1.5 years, but it was 3 years ago.
Yeah.
So things are a bit different now.
Yeah, a little settled down. It's settled down, but there's still a lot there.
Yeah.
Still a lot there. Nothing to be done. I just went to see my 5th neurosurgeon, who gave me good news and bad news. There's nothing to fix. So the good news is nobody's coming at me with a scalpel. And
True.
the bad news is there's nothing for anybody to do at this point. I'm just, the term is post-laminectomy syndrome, where basically they're just telling me my back is beat to shit.
Yeah.
Like, okay, that about covers it.
I can understand that, that feeling of good news, bad news, when there's nothing left to be done, because, that's the chronic part of chronic illness, where it just keeps going, but we're still trying to find improvement. It's not like anyone wants to say, oh, this is going to last forever. Oh, well, no problem. It's all good. It's so, I know I've been spending most of my life trying to find ways to improve, and sometimes I can and sometimes I can't, but yeah, it's not easy, is it?
No. It's like I've been putting 8 to 9 on my pain charts for the last 30 years, and it was, 30 years ago, it was that pain was like an 8 on a scale of 1 to 10. And, and then you get used to it. And then something else happens and you get used to that, and you get used to that, and you get used to that. And here we are. But man, I'm running out of ways to get out of the way of everything.
Yeah. I'm just going to say, for anyone watching who's not familiar, because my hope is there will be some folks watching who don't have chronic illnesses themselves, but just want to understand better. The pain scale is very common, where you go to the doctor and they say, rate your pain on a scale of 1 to 10. And it's a very hard thing to do, because, of course, what's 10? It's usually, sometimes they say the worst pain you can imagine. Sometimes they say the worst pain you've experienced, and that can shift. I know personally, I'll often give an example of something that people might be able to understand as, here's a thing that is not unique to chronic illness, and here's how I rate it. And I know for me, that helps a lot. I had a bit of an accident in the kitchen a few years back. I knocked, those big chef's knives. knocked one
Yeah.
off the counter, it landed on my foot. It cut a couple of tendons. I had to have tendon repair surgery. So I'll tell a new doctor about that and say, here's where it was on my pain scale. It's not the worst pain I've had. Now let me tell you about the worst pain I've had. And I find it puts things in perspective. So I think that kind of thing can be really helpful. But yeah, that pain scale is a shorthand for a lot of us, right? Where we're talking to other people with chronic pain and you just say, oh, on the scale of 1 to 10, everyone knows what that means on the pain scale, the
I
imperfect pain
know.
scale.
And only once that I can ever remember did somebody comment on, Jesus, Brett, you've marked 8 to 9 for the last 3 years.
Yeah,
No, it's like nobody ever brings that up.
they just accept it.
It feels, well, or they don't even look at those paperwork, the stuff you fill out every month. Like my pain person, I have to fill out the same forms every single month. And it's always the same. And I just don't see them reading it all because nobody, I can put arrows here. This is what hurts. Nobody brings it up. So what's new?
Right.
Okay, I'll start over.
It can get redundant for sure.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, what made you want to be involved in this project?
Well, obviously I am involved in the field, so to speak. I love writing. As you said, I've written 3 books. Writing was a huge part of my whole adult life. It was something I was inherently good at. Some people, I write well and I suck at math. So I'm one of those language arts guys. I know, like I was going at the time we first started talking about this book. I was living in Phoenix, finishing up a couple of years down there, and with work. Sorry, I'm having trouble keeping my thoughts.
That's okay. I was asking what
So
made you want to be involved.
I was going to a fibro group, and there was always about 15 women and 2 guys. And that's always been my history, especially in like the social services field, in a world full of therapists and social workers and something like that. I was always in the minority, but I was a journalism major. I love to write. It's what helped me in my career. I got lots of promotions because of my writing skills. I wrote reports for most of my bosses. I wrote reports that had to go directly to court or something like that. So I just decided to combine the two, and so that's why.
And that's perfect. I was so pleased to get your pieces because, well, for a lot of reasons. I thought they were very well written and touched on some really important topics, but also because I was struggling so much to get men to submit their pieces. That was something that didn't surprise me, but it frustrated me. And I've had so many people ask, why don't you have more men in the book? It was so hard to get those submissions. And then not only did you write excellent pieces, but one of them specifically spoke about a lot of the stigma around masculinity in the world of chronic illness. And it's such an important topic. So in a way, it was very meta because I was trying to explain to people, okay, here's the thing. First of all, more women are diagnosed with chronic illnesses. So there's the numbers game, but also there's the social stigma. Men are taught not to acknowledge it, etc. And then you went and spoke about that precise issue. So I really appreciated that. Was there anything in particular that led you to choose that topic?
That was having my common core of youth throughout 30 years were fatherless boys. And so, most of my books, they're about the change of masculinity from boys to men. And so the whole boyhood, manhood, masculinity piece has always been a huge passion of mine. I had one of those overbearing, over competitive kind of dads. And so anyway, I've done a ton of work through the years, just using my own family as reference for all the kids I was working with. And then I remember, I think when we first talked, you were talking about how you couldn't get amen. And I already knew that because I'd been to groups. I ran a fibro, my girlfriend and I ran a fibro group here in Reno up for a couple of years, up till probably somewhere before the pandemic. Um, oh gosh, sorry.
No, no
Right now.
worries. You know, it's an interesting thing that I don't think people can understand until they've experienced it. And my experience, I'm sure, is different than yours, but this cognitive impact of brain fog or other cognitive issues where I know I'll be speaking and then the thought will just drop out of my head. It's like it
Right,
never existed. And I
right,
have no idea what I was talking about, or a word will just disappear. A very
right.
common word. And it's
Well,
very
yeah,
frustrating.
it was actually the same as when I was doing counseling and therapy. Is you couldn't get the dads, you couldn't get the men to walk into the room. So I was really, familiar with that dynamic of men not showing to touchy-feely stuff. I got over that a long time ago. My struggle right now is just asking for help, um, which is getting more and more. And the simplest things like, can you please get me a glass of ice water? I mean, that's just embarrassing to ask for. So that's why is that feeling is always with me. I'm just sitting here right now doing tons of guilt, not being able to help clean the house or not being able to help with dishes, any of that stuff. And so that really eats at the masculine soul, which has always been taught to be, independent, strong, stoic. We're not supposed to show pain, that stuff. Can't ask for, directions. That kind of stuff. And I've never really been that kind of guy. I've been very independent, but my pride wasn't completely wrapped around it like so many guys are. So that's really what got me going on the two topics, that they were not going to be just about, chronic back pain and this is what it's done to my nervous system and these are the symptoms that I'm dealing with right now, but it's also trying to bring in the male story without many men around to help. So I chose the two directions. One was kind of, I used the grieving process, the grieving cycle, which helps me let go of things. And then the other one was pretty much about, how I'm not supposed to. It's like I'm a guy, I'm not supposed to write poetry, but I do. So it was to kind of try and undo all those stereotypes.
Well, I'm really glad, like I said, that you touched on both of those because they're both so important. And I think, grief was touched on a few times in the book because let's face it, that's huge. That's something that I think we all deal with at some point, is grieving what we've lost, either something we've lost in the present or our idea of what the future was going to be.
Yeah.
And that's
Well,
something
and
that
also, but I
impacts
mean,
everyone.
yeah, excuse me. I was a very active athlete, very outdoors. I spent 3 years in Hawaii, 27 years in Lake Tahoe, and so I had lots of toys for playing. But there came a point where I had to sell my cross country skis because I couldn't do that anymore, and then I had to sell my snowshoes, and then I had to sell my golf clubs, and then I had to sell my canoe. It's just every year it was like part with this, part with this, part with this another big piece of your life. Here's another big piece of your life. No more backpacking, no more sleeping on the ground. My wife and daughter would go camping and I would drive out every day to hang out with them during the day and then drive all the way back into Tahoe to sleep. And yeah, just on and on.
Yeah. And each thing is a new loss, I think.
Right. So I kind of used Kubler-Ross's grief cycle, literally, which I'd been using a lot. Thankfully, that was part of my work, and I got to learn and figure out how to use that really well. So I've been doing that, but I'm just so tired of letting go of stuff.
And for those who don't know, sorry to interrupt, but just for anyone who doesn't know, that is a very well-known thing. It's considered the 5 stages of grief. There have been updates and changes, but the classic model that you're referring to has 5 stages, which are denial, anger.
Bargaining.
Bargaining is next. Okay. And then
Depression.
Right,
and
depression and then acceptance.
then acceptance. So
Right.
if you take that, for example, with water skiing, so the first one is, I can't believe I can't do this. I'm going to, I'll do this. I'll just do it easier. Or, you just don't believe that you can't do it again. And then when you get out there and you've skied once and your back is screaming and you drag me into the boat, please, then you're angry about the whole thing. And then you start making deals. Well, maybe I'll just hydroslide, or maybe I'll go back to 2 skis so I don't fall. So, just that. And then depression, which is natural with the loss of anything that's important to you. And then acceptance is kind of like when we think of our dead grandmothers, that bittersweet feeling of, I accept it. I don't, it's good and it's bad. It's bittersweet. And that's when you've completed the cycle. So that's what I've used for the silliest things, from baseball mitts to mowing my lawn, to stacking my firewood, everything I ever had to let go of. And it just became more and more towards the end of when I had to leave Tahoe, about, actually, I guess 9 years ago. Geez.
And you say silly things, and I think that a lot of people do consider these things silly because they see them as individual things. But there's this cumulative impact where you're not giving up one small thing, you're giving up a lot of things, big and small, and even small things that can mean a lot, right? We all know that sometimes the things with the biggest emotional value aren't big and flashy. So I think that I think it's important not to discount the importance of all of these things that we have to give up.
Oh, they're really important. They're somebody else's knitting. There's somebody else's travel. It's just whatever your passion is. And it's just been really frustrating to I've been letting go since my 30s. And it gets old. I don't have much to let go of anymore. So
Yeah.
except my walking, I guess. That's next to go. Yeah, I'm trying to get through my head that I'm headed to a wheelchair for out of the house, maybe in the house. So.
Well, I hope that the wheelchair is helpful for you, at least.
Me too. At least I can get out.
Yeah. I know a lot of people say it provides. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, the last 2 trips to my pain doctor, I barely got into the office. Just from the car to the office. It's just too much.
Yeah.
So.
That's the reason I think a lot of people say it provides freedom.
Mm-hmm.
I've only used one in limited circumstances. And in those limited circumstances, I have found it incredibly helpful. The first time I used it was a huge mental adjustment.
Oh, I bet. I've been
But
working
it got
on
easier.
that. Yeah, that's coming back to the male stuff. That's really, when you lose your autonomy and your independence and even your ability to move as you wish. It's really difficult for men who are more doers, who judge themselves on, what they do and what they've done, and how strong they are, and all of that kind of stuff. And it's really weird for me. Like, I have a best friend I've known since I was 4 years old, and he's never been in the hospital. He got 6 stitches once here. He's never broken a bone, never dislocated a finger, nothing. And I can tell he looks at me and he just doesn't get it. He gives me little gadgets to keep me busy. Oh, here's an Alexa, Bret. Maybe this will help your life. I'm like, most of you need time, not stuff.
Yeah. I think it's
But it's
probably
amazing how some people have not experienced anything, which just blows my mind. If you've been on the planet for 65 years, lucky.
Yeah.
Lucky. Who's jealous? Me?
Yeah, I mean, they can't imagine our lives, but we can't imagine theirs. I mean, I have friends who go to the doctor once a year for a checkup. I don't think I've ever been able to do that in my whole life. I can't imagine what that would feel like. It just is beyond the realm for me, because I've had this since I was a child, and there was just never a time where it was just limited to a checkup. And I appreciate people meaning well and wanting to help, but it can be very hard to understand. That's why I'm hoping people will be able to maybe pick up the book and say, hey, check out Bret's piece right here. Could you read this? Maybe you'll understand better what it is I've been trying to tell you. Because maybe Bret was more eloquent about it than I might have been. And actually, I do read a passage from your piece, Chronic Illness versus Masculinity, when I do talks. And I will often read it back to back with another piece where another author speaks a bit about how women are taken less seriously because they're women. And it's very interesting to look at those back to back and just think about how two people can go into a doctor's office, or 10 people or however many, and be treated so differently just based on their gender. And yet no one is necessarily treated better. I find that very frustrating, but
Right.
I'm hoping that as more attention has been brought to this over in recent years, and I'm hoping it will continue to be, hoping we might see some systemic changes.
We can hope.
Eventually, yes.
Oh, man.
It's frustrating. I'm going to say just very quickly, folks, if you're enjoying this video, if you want to see more about chronic illnesses, hear more from authors like Bret, please hit like below. It definitely helps. And you can subscribe down below. Hit that subscribe button, and then you'll know when there are new videos. Anyway, back to our program. So I know that we've been talking for a little bit now. And we'll have to wrap up soon. I'm wondering, what else is it that you would like people to know about you, about either your chronic illness journey or other parts of your life, or just anything? And I'm sorry, just threw a really open question at you.
That's a big question. Actually, what I was going to say is my life is pretty much an open book, and I've published most of what I've done in my adult life already. I guess I feel about all of that I can do for the field right now, I can't type anymore, is just to try and help people like you promote, you know, the next generation of people. Just like I was teaching, almost hardly doing any teenagers at the end of my career. I was teaching grown-ups to work with teenagers, which is the way it should be. I feel that it's severely inhibited my ability to become an elder and a mentor. Well, I am an elder, but a mentor, because I don't have any way, since we don't do that as a culture. You know, we send all of the retired people off to Florida and Arizona and tell them thanks, but we don't need you anymore, which I always thought was really a criminal kind of component to our culture. You know, most native cultures, sure, the old people get old and they can't hunt anymore and fish, but they can teach and they tell stories and they keep the culture alive. So I'm just trying to show that you can have a huge amount of pain and do it gracefully or with a sense of humor. Again, mine is more pain. The other symptoms don't bother me quite so much, but they're all so interconnected and one begat the other. So it's just become this blur of surgeries and rehabs and
Yeah.
Anyway.
One thing I'd love to ask you about, you mentioned earlier towards the beginning, starting a support group.
Yeah, I started a meetup group.
Okay, meetup group. So I know that you personally have some experience with counseling, so that's not a skill set that everybody has.
Yeah,
but I
that's
am
really
curious.
comfortable for me.
Yeah, but I'm curious, like, what was the style of it, I guess, because I know it's so needed and so many people are looking for a resource like that. I'm just curious how you ran it.
Well, you know, the nature of the beast is, as you've seen, people don't show, people cancel. I could have 8 people, you know, RSVP and nobody shows. That's the problem with dealing with people with chronic pain, you know. So it was really hard to kind of stay structured at all, or to bring in a guest speaker like we did in Arizona. That was a much bigger group, of course, because it's a bigger area.
Yeah, that sounds like a familiar issue. I'm in a support group now that was well established before I came, but even there, I've seen people. There'll be 15 in a group. There'll be 4 showing up. It
Right.
depends. But an interesting thing is, a couple of years ago, people were saying, technology's improved. Is there some way we can do a video of some sort or recording? And we were like, well, we can't do a recording because privacy issues, maybe some sort of video thing, but not everyone understood the technology. And then in this
Mhm.
last year, suddenly the technology became so ubiquitous and we couldn't have in-person meetings. So they all moved to Zoom, and people have been showing up who weren't able to show up before. I'm sure it's harder for some people who aren't as comfortable with the technology or who have trouble looking at screens, or although they can call in. But I find it interesting now more people are able to show up because you don't have to have the energy to get dressed and leave your house and maybe drive or take a bus, right? So in a lot of ways, it's made things easier. And I'm seeing that in other areas. I know my social
Right.
life has never been so good as it has this last year because I can go to everything. I don't have to have the energy to leave the house. And I've only had to miss a few things once
Good
they
point.
moved to Zoom.
Good point.
Yeah. Well, I'm hoping maybe people who are watching might choose to get together with other friends with chronic illness online, because then you don't have to be local to each other.
Yeah. So to finish the meetup story, the meetup was more conversational,
Mm, okay.
just support. People would come in and they'd be in tears, or they just come from the doctor and that was not a good appointment, that type of stuff. But there was never a steady enough base to really focus on like reading a 3 articles per week from your book. That just didn't work. And then it got to where it was too hard for me. I just couldn't sit there for 2 hours again. And so I wish I'd like to do more. And that's part of what makes me feel wimpy as a man is, I've been running groups and helping people for 3 decades. And now I can't figure out how to do it.
Right.
Or it's getting harder.
Yeah, it sounds like it.
I'm also just, the pandemic and just having just a lot of body problems again right now. It just makes me not want to take anything on. I don't want to accept. I was 10 minutes from writing you. I wasn't sure I was going to be able to sit in this chair this morning.
And yet,
Yeah,
here you are.
I'm distracted, so that helps.
Actually, I found distraction can be very helpful, especially on
Sure,
the worst days.
sure. So I spend a lot of time. I mean, if you take away the few times I walk to the bathroom and the kitchen and stuff, I spend 23 hours a day in a recliner.
Yeah.
That's it. So read a lot of news.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Well, I don't like to watch TV during the day. That's never been my thing. I've never actually been a TV person until a few years ago. I never had cable. I still never had cable.
That's not necessarily a bad thing.
Oh no! Like I told my friend, he used to go, when did you get that master's degree? I kind of lost track. He says, how do you get these books going and stuff? And I said, I sit there every night for a couple of hours on the couch.
Yeah.
I taught myself Photoshop, web building, wrote a book, first book, all that stuff, just sitting on the couch. 2 hours a night for 2 years to get a master's. Dead 2 hours a day for 2 years.
Impressive.
Well, it helps. Yeah, well, I'm pretty good at getting what I want. I don't mind working hard.
Sounds like it.
Uh-uh.
I mean, it sounds like that's what's gotten you to where you're at. While obviously you're dealing with a lot of difficult things, you've also accomplished a lot, such
Right.
as that support group, which maybe you didn't continue, but even having started it in the first place is something that very few people have done. So
Yeah, I'm really
clearly you're someone who
frustrated.
does things.
So I'm not doing too many Zooms of any kind because I keep having these brain cramps, like with you. The last 4 years I was working up until 2016. I was going to Prague every year to teach. which was really cool. And that was booming. I was spending a month at a time over there and just having a great time teaching my stuff. They had translated my book into Czech, so we had a common, and that was really cool. And then I came back and I had this neck surgery, and I'll never get on a plane again at this point. So I had to cancel. I canceled twice in 1 year, and eventually I canceled that next year, and eventually I had to convince myself that I can't do it. I couldn't take the walking. I couldn't take the sitting. I couldn't take the 10-hour workshop days. So, more grief and loss.
Exactly.
Going back to what you said about groups real quick, before I forget, which I will forget, I would suggest that people who are interested in like starting a meetup do a little bit of basic research on group dynamics, because, groups can get really weird if you got one person who's overbearing or one person never seems to speak up, and how do you make that safe enough for them, and what might that be? And again, I got lucky because I had tons of training and so much practice, but it helps to be comfortable, especially if you're going to be running the thing.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, just go get some basic, because there's different types of groups. There's a group to create, a task, like we need a new bridge, so this group is going to do that. That's boring. And then there's process groups, which are really fun. I dig process groups because you always learn something.
Yes, and clearly you're someone who loves learning.
Well, and people have the most amazing stories. In my life, I heard the same story from teenagers thousands of times. Oh, I got caught up in this, those kinds of things. But it's still always different. It's a different mother, it's a different city, it's a different neighborhood, it's a different gang. And so I love people's stories. That's what makes it personal.
And I think that's a perfect note to end on, as we have been sitting here listening to your story to make it more personal. I think that's very fitting.
Okay.
So is there something else you'd like to add before we say goodbye?
No, people need to speak up to their doctors. I think that's more of a problem maybe for women than men, because we're taught not to let anybody walk all over us. But know your body. I think most of us do.
Yeah.
I know my body. I know my body inside and out. I know everything about my body. And sure, this doctor's the neurosurgeon and he's the expert, but he's only seen me for 5 minutes, And so I think sometimes you got to put your foot down and say, wait a minute, listen. And we all just have to keep doing that, keep pushing the fibro and the fibro groups and spoonies and everything we can, so it becomes more and more acceptable and mainstream. At least fibros. When I first got diagnosed in the 90s, none of my doctors would believe it, even though another doctor gave it to me. But it was the only thing that made sense of my symptoms.
Right.
So I didn't argue. I just went, yeah, that's it. I don't care what all these other guys are telling me. That's what this is. And shoot, that's before I even had any surgeries. So there was two things going on. As I realized, is my back was deteriorating, and then the damage it was doing other things to my body. It took a while to catch up with me.
That makes sense.
So keep track of your stuff, write it down.
Yeah, I concur. Definitely keep track, write it down, know your body. I will say
and be heard.
Sorry?
Try and be heard.
Yes, well, that's key. So you mentioned for women speaking up. I think the problem is a lot of us will speak up and not be taken seriously. And I think if you have the option of seeing a different doctor, see a different doctor. If the doctor isn't listening, you can't assume that the problem is you. It's them. Not everyone is fortunate to be able to choose a different doctor, so you're going to have to make them listen, but insist on being heard. It's hard, but it's very important. And much better than not being heard.
And doctors are just people. They've got everything wrong with them that we do up here.
That's true.
So no, I've got some great doctors, and we've all got stories we could.
Oh, that's a whole other video.
Exactly.
Could spend another hour on that. Okay, well, on that note, Bret, thank you so much for being here today. I really
Thank you for the
appreciated you
invite.
joining.
That was really fun. I appreciate it.
Oh, good. I'm glad.
Thank you.
Everyone, if you enjoyed this video, again, please like the video below, hit the subscribe button. Thank you all for watching, and please come back to see more videos. Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.